In the early 90s, Sega tried their hand at the Ninja Gaiden series with two brand new games that actually worked as side stories to the core NES trilogy. In other words, the term Gaiden actually makes sense this time around. We've already covered the Master System entry on this channel, developed by Sims and published by Sega, but a year before that one dropped, the battery-draining handheld got its own original release. Japan System House created this one with Sega, acting again as publisher. It's a colorful little adventure with a nonsensical plot. It's also way too short and far too easy, but I've gotta say, what's here is pretty decent, if you can find it for cheap. Back in the day, the Game Gear often acted as a portable Master System with similar hardware and a larger color palette. However, Sega often released brand new games on the handheld instead of strictly porting titles from the 8-bit home machine. Ninja Gaiden on the Game Gear is its own game, and it does some pretty remarkable things. The stages are varied, the controls are responsive, and the graphics are extremely vibrant. Though, as I mentioned before, it is quite short, and overall, it feels a bit unfinished. I had a Game Gear before I had a Game Boy, so I have a lot of love for the kit, despite it being a bit of a battery-draining little bitch. It also didn't quite fit in my pocket the same way the Nintendo alternative did, though that was a bit of a stretch as well. My point is, Game Gear games were about $40 in my country in the retail market, and Ninja Gaiden isn't quite worth that price. There are barely 5 short levels, with some of the later ones feeling a bit more like boss rushes rather than fully developed ideas. When I picked this up as a kid, I finished it in one go, and my recent playthrough for this review was the same. I died a couple times throughout, but most of those deaths were at the hands of the final boss, which is just an exercise of pattern memorization. Once I mastered it, I barely took a hit. The entire game can be finished in less than a half hour if you know what you're doing, and health potions are frequently dropped every few screens or so. The regular enemies pose next to no challenge, and the platforming is pretty minimal. There's a fun, vertical scrolling section to break up the monotony, but I'm always left wanting more after each completion. Using sub-weapons is a bit bizarre, as it requires the player to push down rather than up, which can be a little annoying if you're simply trying to duck and attack. In this one, Ryu is on the hunt for a demon terrorist who wants the world's big powers to go to war. The iconic cutscenes from the NES trilogy make their return, this time with blood. Unfortunately, the presentation is a bit boring and flat this time around, with illustrated scenes that tend to go on a bit too long. They hang on a still image for a while without changing it, and they don't offer up a ton of variety. Gameplay-wise, this one doesn't quite feel like Ninja Gaiden. Ryu has a very floaty jump, which kind of goes against the tightness of the NES trilogy, and there's quite a bit of flicker, both on the actual hardware as well as this emulated version that I've captured footage with. Honestly though, I can't really hold any of those negatives against the game. No, it's not worth the full $40, but if you can find it on the cheap, it's a pretty good Ninja Gaiden. Or a Ninja Gaiden Gaiden. Kenji Yamazaki's soundtrack is pretty decent, but it lacks the punch and variety of its console brethren. Many of the tunes follow the same chord structures, and while the harmonies are often good, they aren't all that memorable. It's a slightly above average score at best, with some pretty frantic pieces that complement the gameplay, but in a series often known for its music, it pales in comparison. Ninja Gaiden on the Game Gear is a bite-sized experience that I'd recommend trying at a bargain bin price. It's not as fun or as clever as the Game Gear Shinobi titles and pales in comparison to the Master System entry released a year later, but it's a fun little action platformer that's worth a few bucks.